Hello, this is Sondra Oster Baras, bringing you a few words of Bible from the heart of Biblical Israel. This week's Torah portion is again a double portion, Behar, Bechukotai, and it begins with Leviticus chapter 25, and actually it's interesting, it tells us that these next chapters were actually said to Moses on Mount Sinai. It's a bit of a throwback because we already left Mount Sinai. At the end of Exodus, this is going back to that. That's just an interesting thing. Sometimes things in the Bible are written a bit out of order. This is one of them. But I would like to just focus on this first chapter, chapter 25. The very first subject of this Torah portion is the sabbatical year and the Jubilee. This is an agricultural system that God sets up. And the system is that you work your land for 6 years, and on the seventh year you rest. On the seventh year you do not plant, you do not harvest, you just let your fields lay fallow. Of course, you can take from the fields, and this is something that's very, very interesting. The fields are there, the food is there, but it's not yours. Anybody can take it, but you can't produce it. You can't prune the vines. You can't do anything to make the ground yield. Fruits will continue growing their fruit trees. So you'll pick your fruit. But things that need to be planted will not be planted that year, which means the following year it won't grow. You'll have a late start. You're going to have to wait till after the seventh year and only that plant. Then we learned about the Jubilee year, which is basically a sabbatical year. In other words, we have 7 cycles, which are each 7 years, 6 years of work, and a 7th year of no work, no working the fields, giving the land a rest. And after those 7 cycles, there will be a 50th year. In other words, after 49 years, 7 times 7, there's a 50th year, and that's the Jubilee year. So essentially, the Jubilee year is going to be a double sabbatical year because you're coming right on the heels of the 7th year of the last of those 7 cycles, which is a sabbatical year. Now you have another one, okay? But in the Jubilee year, it is a whole different kind of year. It's much more significant than just not working your fields for a year, but everything changes. And I just want to read this one verse, verse 10. And you shall sanctify the 50th year. You shall proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you should return to his holding, and each of you shall return to his family. So I don't know if you recognize this, but this particular verse, part of it, you shall proclaim freedom throughout the land. That quote is inscribed on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. And going back to the very beginnings of the United States, this part of the verse was selected because, of course, from the beginning of the United States, the early founders of the United States saw themselves as starting a whole new kind of country, a country that where every man, woman, whatever, would be free. We've gotten freer since then, but certainly if you compare 18th century conditions in the United States and the idea of the freedom of its citizens to what was going on in Europe at the time, the United States was certainly a great step forward. And I just think it's very interesting that they chose a verse from the Bible to represent this freedom because it just tells you something about how biblically oriented the founding fathers of the United States were. But in this case, it's very interesting. It is talking about freedom. What kind of a freedom is it talking about? So first of all, everybody gets to go home. Everyone gets to go back to the family. What is this referring to? Okay, so the verses after this talk a lot about land ownership. And here, what happens in the Jubilee year? As you know, when the nation of Israel first comes into the land of Israel, the entire land is divided by tribes. Each tribe gets a certain part of the land of Israel, and within that tribal territory, the land is further divided into the various families of that tribe. Now, the Jubilee year is a way of ensuring that those tribal territories remain intact, because throughout that 50-year period, people could sell their land. And if you were from the tribe of I don't know, Simeon, and you wanted to sell your land to someone from Naphtali, okay, that meant somebody that tribal land is in the north suddenly owns a piece of the land in the south, and vice versa. In order to ensure that that kind of a sale would never be a perpetual sale, during the Jubilee year, all of that is erased, and all the land goes back to their original tribal owners. So essentially, if you ever sold land during the biblical period, if you sold land to somebody, you actually were only selling a use of the land until the Jubilee year, because in the Jubilee year, everything goes back to its original owners. So it gives you some idea of there's a certain sanctity in this original division of the land as God has mandated to the tribes and to the families. The other thing I think is very interesting is that it's not just the land, it's also about people. Now you'll recall we said that at the very beginning in verse 10, it says not only everybody goes back to their estate, but everybody goes back to their family. And later on, we talk about slaves, okay? Slaves who go free. This is in verse 40. In verse 40, he shall remain with you as a hired or hound laborer. He shall serve with you only until the Jubilee year. And this is talking about the most common incidents of slavery within the nation of Israel was if somebody was very poor, hit rock bottom, was full of debts, and the only way they could get out of debt was to sell themselves into slavery, and then in that way pay back their debt. Now, this is usually only for a period of 6 years, and we learned about that in the book of Exodus. But there's a limitation to this, because even if somebody wants to remain in servitude forever, for a long time, there is no such thing as remaining in servitude forever within the children of Israel. Because at the Jubilee year, you go back to your family no matter what. So even though there is a certain kind of slavery in the Bible, this Jubilee year sets all the slaves free. So that really is extremely interesting. A couple things I just want to point out that I think are powerful messages about this whole concept of both the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and the Jubilee year. So first in verse 21, I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. Okay? Now, we talked about the need for the 7th year. First of all, at the time of Jubilee, you've got 2 sabbatical years in a row. But even if you only have 1 sabbatical year, okay, the 7th year, you're not doing anything. If you're not planting in the 7th year, that means your 8th year is not going to yield either. So you do need this extra blessing so that whatever you have produced in the 6th year, whatever you have harvested in the 6th year, will last you through the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th year. And I think that's a beautiful promise that God makes. You will follow this, but you will be okay. And then in verse 23 and 24, but the land must not be sold beyond forever, in perpetuity, because the land is mine. You are merely residents and sojourners here amongst me. Throughout the land that you hold, you must provide for the redemption of the land. So we have 2 ideas here. First of all, the land belongs to God. And we see this in the fact that the tribal divisions of the land are so important, because this is how God gave us the land. And we must preserve that. It is not ours to buy and sell however we want. At the end of the day, the land is ours. And of course, that means we cannot sell to others. We cannot sell to people not within the Jewish nation, because the land must remain in this state of God's land that he has given to the nation of Israel. And this idea of redeeming the land, okay, it is our responsibility to redeem the land. In fact, today, when we purchase land in Israel from our Arab neighbors, we are considered to be redeeming the land, not just buying it, but redeeming it back to its original purpose as put forth in the Bible. And we see that again in the concluding verse, or not the concluding verse of this section, verse 38. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be your God. God took this land, gave it to us, okay, to give us the land of Canaan to be your God. And we know that he gave us the land, but it remains God's land. And our living in this land has to be under this idea of the Lord is our God. Have a wonderful weekend. Shabbat Shalom.
I hope you enjoyed that video. And we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell. And that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.